The Dailu Motor Car Company. The story begins with David Greenblatt. In the late 50s, as Canadian motorsports started to garner public interest, David was gradually building a reputation as a top-level race car driver. From the late 50s to the mid-60s, David won some 40 races and placed in the top 5 positions in many others. Because of his success, he was offered drives in some of the top race teams of the day, including manufacturers such as Sadler, Jaguar, Corvette, Shelby Cobras, and of course, most notably, Ferrari. In fact, David was the only North American driver to receive direct support from Ferrari of Italy. He was inducted in the Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame in 1999, not only for his achievements as a race car driver, but also as a constructor of the famous Dailus, a Canadian-built race car that drew attention in the world of car racing. In 1960, having driven some of the best race cars of the day, David figured that he could take the best of what these cars had to offer, improve on their weaknesses, and build his own race cars. So David began to focus less on driving, and along with his close friend and American-born Canadian race car driver, Peter Ryan, he focused on building and managing what they fully intended to be world-class race cars. Now, Peter was a rising star as a driver and was recruited by Lotus UK to drive their Formula One cars. While he was racing in Europe, David started to work on the race car project. Now, Luigi Cassiani had recently immigrated from Italy, where he was a race car technician for the Alfa Romeo works team. He had just set up shop in Montreal. David proposed to Luigi to collaborate on building a race car from the ground up in order to compete with the world's best. Luigi agreed, and in 1961, the Dailu Motor Company was born. The name was a fusion of Dave for David and Lou for Luigi. With his knowledge of European race cars, Luigi constructed a tubular space frame chassis, but still keeping the more traditional front engine layout. But with one major improvement. While most front engines sat over the front wheels, the Dailu's engine sat way back, behind the front wheel axle, effectively pioneering the front mid-engine design. David and Luigi used another Canadian by the name of Bill Sadler, his concepts for the front suspension, but decided to design and build their own independent rear suspension. The Dailu's power came from a 327 cubic inch Corvette engine with carburetors instead of the unreliable fuel injection system of the time. The engine produced a whopping 400 horsepower at a time when most race cars produced maximum 300 horsepower. The Dailu was fitted with a 4-speed transmission, and Mike Saggers, who had a background in aviation, was called in to produce a thin-gauge aluminum body. The design proved to be very effective. The Dailu tipped the scales at an ultra-lean 1,600 pounds, a technical stat that raised many eyebrows and caused some concern. The Dailu was fast and it was light. Unfortunately, when the car was near completion, Peter Ryan was killed in a European Formula 2 race. David was devastated, but vowed to move ahead with the project. So Canadian driver John Cannon was recruited to drive the Dailu for the 1962 season. From the outset, during testing and some club races, the Dailu Mark I proved strikingly fast and easily outpaced the competing cars. This led to David deciding it was time to enter the Dailu Mark I on the biggest stage of all, the Players 200. Coming to Canada for the first time, with a limited budget and a new car, sponsorship proved very difficult. But because of its forward-thinking design and its stunning speed, David secured sponsorship from the US-based company Bardal Lubricants. And the car was rebranded the Dailu Bardal Special. A high-profile driver who raced for the Ferrari Formula One team was to drive the Dailu Bardal Special. His name was Olivier Gendebien. It was remarkable for a Canadian-built garagiste car to be driven by one of the world's premier drivers. This demonstrated the reputation that the Dailu Mark I had established. Even Enzo Ferrari took notice of the independent, small shop, garagiste car that was winning races. Olivier drove the Dailu in practice and in pre-qualifying, but stepped away after noticing an oil leak. He later admitted to the German press that he was not comfortable with the Dailu's extreme speed and aggressive acceleration, which he was not accustomed to driving. John Cannon proved to be the right driver for the car, finishing first in 5 out of 10 races, including a handful of top 10 finishes in 1962. Beating Europe's best, the Dailu Mark I began appearing on front covers of top American and European racing magazines. You know, David once mentioned to me that the only reason Ferrari offered him the Ferrari 275 LM and the Dino 206 to drive was if he agreed to stop racing those damn Dailus. In September 1962, John Cannon drove the Dailu Mark I to win the pole position and finished first in the pre-final race at the Nassau Speed Week. Unfortunately, during the race, a gas line came loose. The Dailu caught fire and was partially destroyed. So David set out to build a Dailu Mark II. John returned to drive the Dailu Mark II and finished first once again. David went on to build additional versions up to the Mark VII, but success never surpassed the original Dailu Mark I. David retired from racing in 1977. At the time, he owned a car rental company called Montreal Auto Leasing. I worked for David as a mechanic, maintaining his car fleet. Vintage car racing was starting to become popular in North America and in Europe. With so much interest in the Dailu Mark I from the vintage racers, David asked me if I would be interested in being part of the restoration project. I obviously said yes, so we retrieved the fire-damaged Dailu Mark I, set about restoring it to its former glory. Once the car was completely stripped down, we realized the chassis was weakened by the fire, and a new chassis had to be constructed. David Thornton, a technician from the March Formula One team, was brought in to fabricate a new chassis. Using the same gas torch welding techniques used in 1961, the new frame was fabricated side by side with the old Mark I frame to match its exact specifications. I was responsible for the mechanics, and Italian Alberto Giglio reproduced the aluminum body by hand. David raced the reborn Dailu Mark I in the 1978 season, most notably as a featured guest at the Canadian Grand Prix at the newly formed racetrack, which is now known as Le Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, right here in Montreal. After the 1978 season, David lost interest in vintage racing, and he focused solely on cigarette boat racing. And so the Dailu sat in his garage for a few years. He thought maybe one day he would convert it into a street car. In 1980, I approached David and asked if he would sell me the car. He agreed, but under one condition: convert it into a street car one day. David practically gifted me the car. I raced it successfully for 11 years, then went about converting it into a street car. What you see now is what I call the Stradale version. I occasionally go for early morning drives. I show it off at some of our local car shows. My name is Pasquale Cerasuolo, and I drive a Dailu Mark I. What the? I need a beer. I need something. Okay, here we go.